What is civil governance? And this is section 3 of the Reformed Anarchism statement. And section 3A, it has to do with civil justice. I'll read that. Civil justice distinguished from morality is the title of section 3A. Civil governance is the administration of civil justice, that is, the adjudication of disputes over civil political rights according to God-given norms of civil justice, with the rules and enforcement that accompany it. Civil or political justice and rights concern legitimately coercively enforceable normative claims on one's person or property. In this sense, civil justice concerning civil rights and obligations is distinguished from the sense of what is due to others regarding properly non-civil, non-political claims. For example, that which is properly moral concerns what is loving. Violations of civil justice may always be immoral, but not vice versa. Lying and coveting are immoral, but do not necessarily involve crime. That is, the violation of civil political right. All right. So civil justice is clearly distinguished from morality. Explain what would be different about our current society and political landscape if we observed crime this way, and how the civil magistrates would behave differently if we adhered to these concepts.
Yeah, so the main thing this section's doing is distinguishing morality from civil justice in a more particular sense. And the basic way that if this distinction was sort of implemented in civil governance, that would be different. One way to understand it would be the idea of victimless crime would not exist. So whether you think it's a good idea to use, for someone to use X, Y, or Z, I don't know, chemical or drug or medicine or not, right? Doing so when prohibited by a government becomes a crime, right? So during Prohibition in the United States, alcohol was illegal. So maybe you're a teetotaler and you think it's immoral to drink alcohol, but when the government outlawed it, it became a crime. And this distinction between morality and civil justice helps us see what ought to be crimes, right? So in this section, we do about four things. There's like 4 parts, you might say. There's the definition of civil governance. There's the definition of civil justice and or rights. Then it distinguishes between morality and civil justice, and then it considers respective violations. So just to recap, the definition of civil governance, meaning the administration of civil justice, and then it gets a little bit more particular to say what that is. Administering civil justice is adjudicating disputes over civil rights or political rights. Not a special category of rights, but rights that are, well, it goes on to define rights, but to say a little bit more, to adjudicate such disputes according to God-given norms of civil justice with the rules and enforcement that accompany it. And so then defining what, if civil governance is the administration of civil justice, what then is civil justice? Civil justice and rights concern legitimately coercively enforceable normative claims on one's person and property. So that means, and this gets elaborated as we go on into the different sections, so it'll become clearer. But your own person and the things that are yours, right? Scarce resources that belong to you, they are due to you, right? So you ought to have control over those things. And somebody else and what belongs to them properly is due to them. And the civil part, why it's not just justice generally speaking, is because we can speak of what is due to others regarding non-civil, non-political claims, things that don't have to do with what's coercively enforceable regarding their person and property. So that's why we specify that's why we don't just say justice, but civil justice, because it's a particular kind of what's due.
Right.
And it concerns your person and property. And then the distinction between that and morality is that morality concerns what is loving. And so to help clarify that, consider the respective violations of those things. When you do something that's a violation of civil justice or rights, that is, violate what is due to someone else concerning their person and property, let's say you steal from them or you murder them, something like that, or you attack them bodily, that may always be immoral, but there are immoral things that are not necessarily that are not violations of civil justice.
Coveting, for example.
Coveting, lying in many cases, these are immoral, but are not properly crimes.
Right. So you're not loving your neighbor if you covet them in some way. It does seem like God warns us against coveting. It is still a violation of God's law. It's still sin, but it doesn't remove somebody from their life, liberty, or their property.
That's right.
It certainly seems like the premeditative state for all of those things, the thing that leads to those things, but it's not, outwardly expressed in terms of civil injustice.
Right.
Okay.
So that this distinction, and of course, the meaning of civil governance and the meaning of civil justice or rights is important for the rest of what we have to say, but also establishing those things in terms of the distinction between that and morality is important going forward in understanding what God has designed civil governance to be.
Yeah. So in the RAR, the Ref and Republic, if you will, if there's no victim, there's no crime. The civil servants, civil magistrates aren't gonna, waste your time. Like I have a congregant who told me a story, happened probably 20 years ago. He was pulled over by a local law enforcement officer here in our county because the officer just knew that they were going to run the red light. Not you were in the red light. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
It's like, wow, we're living in a minority report here up in East Tennessee. Yeah. So anyway, so the basis, what is your historical, maybe it doesn't even have to be historical, but just from any discipline of academia, where are we getting this notion that we can define crime as only, like, who historically has defined crime that way, either linguistically or legally or, philosophically? Where are we getting that from?
Well, there's two things I can point to for our purposes now. As we go further down, it gets elaborated in terms of scripture a little bit more specifically. But when we look at Romans 13, we'll see that Paul refers to the sword. And that sword is a kind of, well, it's a literal sword, but it's also has figurative meaning for coercion. So it's not as though if a magistrate was to use a gun, that somehow that wouldn't apply. It still applies regarding your person and property, coercion upon those things. And someone like Lysander Spooner, an American lawyer around the Civil War period, he had a lot of great things to say. He wrote a short essay called Vices Are Not Crimes, I believe is the title. And this is in the reference. Every section in this statement has some citation or so, either in the text or at the bottom. So that's worth looking at. His discussion there helps clarify the issue between immorality or vice or sin and what ought to be understood as crime.